Welcome back, everyone. Last week I did a video on the pedophile movement that's going on social media, and I wanted to continue that. I feel like this is a really important subject. This is it's something that needs to be debated against, by all means. And we have Mr. Omnipolitics 16. He's going to come out with a rebuttal video to Suit Yourself and On Doomed. And then you have Jen's channel, and you also have Cartograph. And then outside of YouTube, you have Virtuous Pedophiles. You also have Heart Progress. And in the last video, I left the links to all those things so you could see just how big it is. Might I also remind you that the Washington Post has already been, well, we know the Washington Post sucks, but the Washington Post has already been making articles about pro-pedophilia, or normalizing it anyway. So, at that rate, talking about Jen, YouTuber Jen, JennLover decided that she would respond to my old video, and I had some questions for her, which they have not all been answered. Let me just kind of go over the comments here. She says, sorry, but being a pedophile isn't illegal because it's sexual orientation. And then I go on to say, it's only legal if you have not committed a sex act on a child, bought or sold child porn, then it very much is illegal. This is why making a social pariah is a thing, because when an act is committed, it's just that bad. There's no evidence whatsoever that sex acts on children do not cause damage. In fact, the very opposite happens. Death or severe psychological problems ensue from this. And they said that is why this JennLover responds by saying, this is why it's a human rights violation. It shouldn't be illegal to act on your sexuality. And my response was, in this case, yes, you're committing a human rights violation on a child. And then she responds by saying, all children are victims of abuse. She put that in quotation marks. And then I said, in essence, you're saying that your right to sexual deviation is more important than the right for another person who doesn't want to be sexually injured or psychologically harmed. That's kind of a weird scale, isn't it? If that's the logic we follow, we are on the track to legalizing rape. To which she responded, I'm not advocating for rape, I'm saying consensual relationship. And then I say, there is an overwhelming amount of psychological and medical documentations to support that child sexual acts from an adult lead to severe problems. There is more evidence, medically speaking, to not commit pedophilia. The amount of evidence supporting it is so minuscule and poorly represented, it's not even worth mentioning. How do you rationalize sex with a child as consent? I didn't know what sex was when I was young. I find that is the norm. It comes through growth and development. And then she responds back by saying, children will learn and pick it up. Sex is supposed to be for socially bonding, not procreation. Even the dumbest of wild beasts have sex. I didn't even notice that response. That's a stupid response. Sex is not for socially bonding. Sex is meant for reproduction. And it's not really so much a social bond as it is just a drive in the human body to reproduce. This is why homosexuals still have sex with each other. But anyway, and if you've been in a long-term relationship, you know sex isn't always something that happens on a daily basis. Sex isn't like, if you've been together for a while, anybody that's been married for a long time knows it's like, Being in a relationship is not about sex, but I keep adding on, like, oh, I have to mention that there are psychological and medical evidence that a child cannot consent. It doesn't really make sense that they can consent when the part of their brain and anatomy are not even developed for that until a certain age. Oh, and another question, what would make an older person mid Latin 20s to early mid 30s have any emotional or mental compatibility on a cognitive, rational level? I mean, if a 27-year-old identifies with a child on an emotionally romantic level, I'm going to question their rational state. I mean, did they live in a peat bog for 27 years? On the mental level, though, 27, 33, even 22-year-old mental cognitive connection to talk introspective using the deep and complex thought processes of the frontal lobe? Then she responds, I'm a bit tired right now, but I can't allow you to misrepresent pedophiles. They are the most abhorred group in society. Your lack of understanding isn't helping either. Children reach puberty at different ages, which allows them to be more sexual, even though they are sexual from birth. No, they're fucking not. So anyway, like, I asked the question, though, how can the mentality, the emotional state and mental state of an adult be compatible with that of the mental and emotional state of a child? She has not answered that question. She just comes out and says, you're misrepresenting pedophiles. Oh, no, I'm not really. I'm just asking these questions at this point. I have a reserved opinion, yes, that pedophilia is wrong. That's my stance. If you're going to tell me that it is correct, you have to do better than that. You're going to have to do better than that, honestly. But it's going to be really difficult because there are psychological and medical evaluations done on children, victims of child sexual molestation, and on pedophiles themselves. And we have a pretty long list of what that looks like. It's not a sexual orientation. I'm going to talk about that today. Some of those questions kind of made me think about it a little bit. But so that's an interesting thought. This is what I really want to talk about is it being a sexual orientation. Now, I did read that psychological piece. That psychological, it was an article written from a group of the psychologists about it was about the psychology of homosexuality versus pedophilia, and they were basically talking about how they are very different. So now I wanted to kind of explore more into that and kind of give you an example from, what's the word I'm looking for? Anecdotal. And again, it's only kind of anecdotal. This is stuff that we do know. It can be backed by psychological and medical research. So, but anyway, so it's not a mystery. If you've been watching my channel, you know I'm a homosexual. Now, I can look back in my life and say, I've always known that I was a homosexual. The question is when did I accept it? And that happened around when I was like 14, 15 years old. And I can tell you, like at 14, 15 years old, I was, I had hit puberty. I knew what sex was, and I wanted to have it. But I can tell you that if a 30-year-old came up to me at 14 or 15 years old wanting to have sex with me, I would have been grossed out by that. That's too fucking old. that my brain would not perceive that as physically attractive. I was attracted to people my own age. But when I think back to when I was young, when, like prepubescent, I remember, I didn't know what sex was. I didn't know what sex was. I didn't know what sex was at all. And this is for all of them out there. Omnipolitics, Cartograph, Jen, and this person that says I'm misrepresenting them. So, okay. I can go back, so homosexuality is considered sexual orientation. And I'm going to get into what is classified as mental illness here in a moment. But, so going back to when I was young, it was like, I didn't know what sex was, had no clue what it was. But looking back, I can see that I was a homosexual. And why is that? Well, because not even knowing what sex was, there were other boys that I was around that made me feel funny inside. They sparked dopamine and endorphins, basically. It was basically crushing. I didn't know what was going on because homosexuality was very, very frowned upon back then. So, and I mean, society didn't really talk about it very much. So I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that I felt really good around certain boys. And it's not that I had fantasies of sexual things. I had fantasies of holding their hand and kissing. And so I think that if homosexuality, if I would have known about it when I was that age and was able to be permitted to have a boyfriend at that age, I probably would have done the same thing with my boyfriend that boyfriends and girlfriends do at that age, which is just hold hands and kiss. That's really all they do. I mean, I didn't know what sex was. I had no concept of that. None whatsoever. It's just sometimes you see somebody that you like, and you're like, yeah, I really like them. And you do all this, cute cuddly things, but you don't know what sex is at that age. I've never met anyone that looks back in their childhood and says, yeah, I knew what sex was then. And nobody knew that unless they were exposed to it. And even then, they don't really know what's going on. They walk in on their parents naked and they go, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. And eventually you have to explain the birds and the bees, and they think back to that moment when they see their parents naked laying on top of each other and they go, oh. I mean, it happens. But when you're a child and you see something like that, you find it gross. You're like, that's disgusting. Because you don't really have sexual thoughts at that age. I mean, come on. That's the norm. This is child psychology. This is psychology 101. If you don't know this by now, that you I don't know what the fuck is wrong with you. You're an airhead. So I can look back and say, yeah, I've always been homosexual. I've felt some kind of attraction, whether it be a crush, and then later on after puberty, that's when the sexual fantasies started coming in. And nobody came around and taught me what sexuality was for homosexuals. It happened naturally. These thoughts and fantasies just came to me in my head. They just started popping up when I hit puberty. With these other guys, these other males around me that were my own age. I mean, that's normal post-pubescent things that happen. Everybody that hits puberty, heterosexual males, they start noticing females and they start growing breasts and they go, wow, suddenly I'm having all these thoughts. So it happens naturally. It's not something that's learned. So this JennLover, she's saying that you teach them. Teach them. You don't need to teach somebody what sex is. It comes pretty naturally what you're supposed to do after you hit puberty. You just kind of start getting the idea. It's just the same as nobody taught me how to masturbate. I figured it out on my own. It's natural. It's instinctual. But when you're a kid, and it's not happening instinctually and naturally, it's not natural, it's not instinctual. And this is why I say it is not a sexual orientation to be a pedophile, because if you look back in your life and say, well, I've always been a pedophile because it's your sexual orientation, you're surrounded by people your own age. It's normal to crush on people your own age, even when you're that young. and not know what sexuality even is. So how can you look back in your life and say, I've always been a pedophile, when you were 7 years old surrounded by other 7-year-olds, crushing on the other 7-year-olds around you? That's normal. Whether you go to or lean towards males or females, that would be the determining factor of whether your sexual orientation is homosexual or heterosexual or even bisexual. Ergo, it's not a sexual orientation. Another thing I would like to point out is what mental illness is. The reason why homosexuality is not considered a mental illness is because for something to be considered an actual illness or like a disorder is when it affects your life in a negative way, harming yourself or others, or inhibits you from living your life. That is why, some people have quirks to their personality that may make them seem like they have obsessive compulsive disorder because they're really neat, tidy, and organized. However, if that is not affecting your ability to live your life, it is not considered disorder. And this is what brings me down to pedophilia versus homosexuality. Homosexuality poses no threat to anyone. This is between two consenting adults. They both want it. They both know what it is. Like, there's no mystery about it. It's not like, what is sex? What is the birds and the bees? You know what it is. This is when you've naturally, gone through puberty. You've naturally reached that state where you start getting the fantasies, whether you want them or not, even if, especially at inappropriate times to have fantasies when you're in a classroom and the teacher calls you up to the damn chalkboard because you've been staring at the boy sitting in front of you the whole time, or the girl, whatever your sexual orientation is. When you start getting the fantasies that occur naturally, not because you've been shown, but because they occur naturally, that doesn't pose a threat. You are talking about cognitive, like people who have developed a cognitive ability to think in depth about the consequences of sexuality. And pregnancy is not just it, because that's one of the things that Omnipolitics 16, some of these other pedophilia people push the narrative that you can't make these prepubescent people pregnant. Well, no shit. It's because they haven't hit puberty. They're not ready for sex yet. And you can talk about the animal kingdom all you want. It doesn't occur in the animal kingdom as much as you say it does. I'm not even joking about that. I'm very serious. Animals really don't have, they don't mate for pleasure like people do. There's really only a very small amount of animals in the animal kingdom that have sex for pleasure. People are one of them. And we adapted and kind of evolved to have that, it seems. Maybe. I don't know. We look at our relatives, the bonobo ape and stuff, and I don't think the bonobo apes even do post or prepubescent sex acts, and they do some weird sexual things, but they're fucking animals, They don't have a means to step back and analyze what it is that they're doing, and that goes into psychological evolution. But the reason why pedophilia would be considered a mental illness is because it does pose a threat to others. It does. You could get a child to say yes to you. That doesn't mean they know what they're saying yes to. And I would say this thing. I have not been sexually abused as a child, but I have had a very dark, twisted life. And I can say this, is that let a child have their innocence. Let them have the moment of bliss. Because life has a tendency to chew you up and make you jaded and bitter. It can change the way you think about the world. Life and truth, reality, is dark. And when you're a kid, you're innocent. You are naive to all that stuff. You're blissfully unaware. Why would you want to take a child into the realm of sexuality? And that was the other thing the point that I was going to miss was the pregnancy thing. STDs are a concern. If I had a child and somebody had sex with my child and raped them, essentially, because like I said, they don't know what they're saying yes to. They don't know the pros and cons. If I had a child and somebody gave my child an STD, I don't know if I could ever forgive that. That's something that is totally unforgivable. A child completely innocent to the world, somebody who depends on adults to take care of them. And that's across the animal kingdom. They look to the adults. They look to the parents, the guardians. They're called guardians for a reason. To shield them from the world, to protect them from predators. That's why pedophiles are called predators, sexual predators. Why would you bring that into their lives? Why would you take that innocence away? Why would you bring them into the bounds of love and heartbreak and the complexities of the emotional mind of an adult? Why would you do that to a child? That seems abuse in and of itself. That's enough. Let them have their childhood and stop trying to take something away from them they don't even know they have. They'll grow up soon enough and they will find out just how twisted the world can be, how dark it is, all the liars, all the sociopaths, all of that shit. The murderers, the rapists, racism, just dark evils of the world. They're going to come to know these things eventually, and they will be able to make a cognitive decision in their adult life to weigh the pros and cons and the risks of STDs, pregnancy, emotional discourse, things like that. When you're a child, you don't do those things. You don't know how bad something can hurt you emotionally when you're a child and you just step foot into the abyss and try and wade through the murky water. That's fucked up. That's fucked up. Pedophiles leave the children alone. You have a mental illness. You have a mental illness. And you should seek treatment and psychotherapy. And there are psychologists and psychiatrists that specialize in that field to help you. That's the right thing to do. If you want to come out as try and make society more aware that it is a mental illness, and to stop the social parietism and make an effort to try and keep yourself contained so you do not harm a child, that's one thing. But to come out and try and push the agenda that we should make it legal? Come on now. What percentage of the population do you really think is going to buy into that? Unfortunately, I know the ways of the world. I've been alive long enough. And I know an individual is smart. A group of people are stupid. And it's easy to follow false logic, bad narratives, bad facts. And what you're doing essentially is doing an appeal to pity. You're doing an appeal to an emotive force. You're trying to tug at the heartstrings and say, but I'm just a person like you, I can't help it. You may not be able to help it. Well, there are options, there are treatments available, but by outright saying this is not a mental illness, that it's a human rights issue, that you should be allowed to do that, that's obscene. So are we going to start giving children responsibilities like adult responsibilities, like paying bills, getting a credit card, driving a car? Come on. They're children. Their brains are not fully developed. And really, at 18 years old, your brain isn't even fully developed. And we consider that an adult. And 21, you can drink. But your brain does not actually fully develop until you're 25. And you can see the difference. When you've reached your 30s and you talk to somebody who's 22, you think to yourself, I remember those days. You think you're old, but you're not. You're really fucking young. And that happens. At 30 years old, I had a guy that was 20. He wanted to date me. I said, "You're too young. I'm in my 30s, man. I can't do it. Like your idea of what is wrong in the world is like your concept of the world in general is so different than mine. Because I have been dragged through miles of shit. And I have seen some, they're just not at that experience level. So that's why pedophilia, though, is not a sexual orientation. And even that psychological article even pointed out that with pedophilia, there is no real underlying theme of, because you could have somebody that's a pedophile that's homosexual. And homosexual is a sexual orientation. You could have a pedophile that's bisexual, which bisexual is a sexual orientation. You could have a pedophile that's heterosexual, and heterosexual is a sexual orientation. So it's not a sexual orientation. It's a mental illness. You are a threat to the well-being of children. And so that's why I ask those questions. Even in a scenario of somebody who has reached puberty, let's say they're 17. Somebody is older, that's like in their mid-Latin 20s. Do you really honestly think that in your Latin 20s, you have any kind of compatibility emotionally and mentally with somebody who's in high school, worrying about prom and graduation, shit like that, getting out on their own, establishing their independency, and you're like, shit, man, I gotta pay this bill and I gotta go to the doctor because I found a lump. They don't have those concerns at 17. You're in another world. It's called getting older. Throw away your Peter Pan syndrome. Get over it. You grow old and you die. Everything fucking dies. But anyway, with that, I'm out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. And with that, I am out.